Every home inspector who walks through a house before you buy it is looking at maybe 5% of the plumbing, the part you can actually see. I have crawled under 3,000 houses in 2 countries, and the houses that ruined their new owners were never the ones with the ugly kitchen. They were the ones where nobody thought to ask what was hiding behind the walls. So what exactly should you be asking? There is a young couple I think about a lot. I will call them the Hearts, because that is not their real name. They found a house 2 years ago. Brick front, big kitchen island, fresh paint in every room. They walked through it once with an agent and once with an inspector, and both times everybody smiled and talked about the granite counters. Nobody opened the crawl space access panel behind the water heater closet. 8 months after they moved in, a pipe under the slab let go in the middle of the night. By the time they woke up, the hallway carpet was squelching under their feet, and water had already been running for 6 hours, soaking straight down into the subfloor and the framing underneath it. The repair bill, the flooring, the drywall, the mold remediation came to just under $31,000. Their insurance covered part of it, not all of it. They lived in a rental for 11 weeks while the crew cut open their new floor. And the thing that still eats at me is this. The pipe that failed was polybutylene, gray plastic pipe. It was recalled by the manufacturers back in the 1990s after millions of dollars in class action settlements, and any plumber who has been doing this work for more than a decade can spot it in about 4 seconds. Nobody looked. My name is Suda. I trained under my father in Nagoya starting when I was 17, and I have been doing plumbing and pre-purchase surveys for 32 years, first in Japan and for the last 18 here in the United States. I learned the lesson I'm about to give you the hard way, on my own family's house. When my parents bought their second home outside Nagoya, I was 4 years into the trade, and I told my father the house looked fine. Kitchen, bathroom, water pressure at the sink, all fine. What I did not do was trace the old cast iron drain line under the foundation, because I did not yet know to ask that question. 18 months later, that line cracked. The ground under the entryway sank 2 centimeters, and my father never let me forget it. Gently, but never. That is the lesson underneath everything I am about to tell you. A house does not lie to you, but it does not volunteer the truth either. You have to know which questions to ask it. Quick word before I go further. The old methods my family uses, there is more of it than fits in any one video. I gathered the whole of it into a book you can buy in our pinned comment below. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. So here is the real problem, and it is not that home inspectors are lazy or dishonest. Most of them are neither. The problem is what the standard inspection was built to do in the first place. A typical American home inspection runs 2 to 3 hours for the entire house, roof to foundation, and the inspector is a generalist. He is trained to look, not to test. He is going to run the water, flush the toilets, check for obvious stains, and write a report with photographs. What he is almost never going to do is cut into a wall, run a camera down a drain line, or pressure test a system that looks fine on the surface. And there is a second problem nobody likes to say out loud, which is that in a lot of deals, the inspector was recommended by the real estate agent, and the agent gets paid when the deal closes, not when the deal falls apart over a plumbing problem. I am not saying anybody is crooked. I am saying the incentives in the room are not built around finding the expensive bad news. In Japan, the culture around this is different, and I do not say that to brag on my home country. I say it because it changed how I do this work. Many sellers keep what is called a Jutaku Rira Kisho, a housing history book. Every renovation, every plumber who ever touched the pipes, every repair, written down and kept with the house like a medical chart. You ask for it before you make an offer. Here, you are lucky if the seller remembers who they hired to redo the bathroom in 2009, let alone whether that person pulled a permit. So the buyer is left guessing. There is also a formal pre-sale survey many Japanese sellers commission before the house ever goes on the market, separate from anything the buyer arranges. A licensed inspector goes through the structure, the piping, the roof, and produces a report the buyer can actually rely on before they fall in love with the entryway. It is not free, and it is not perfect, but it exists because the culture assumes the seller should help prove the house is sound, not leave the buyer to gamble. Here, the burden runs the other way. The seller fills out a disclosure form in good faith, but often in real ignorance, because plenty of sellers genuinely do not know what is behind their own walls, and the buyer is left to either pay for their own deep inspection or hope for the best. I am not telling you to move to Japan. I am telling you that the assumption you walk in with, that somebody already checked this, is the assumption that costs people the most money. And here is the counterintuitive part, the thing that took me years to really believe. The parts of a house that scare buyers the most, the ugly wallpaper, the dated kitchen, the cracked driveway, those are almost never what costs you real money. Cosmetics are cheap to fix. What costs you real money is exactly the stuff you cannot see standing in the kitchen with a real estate agent. A pipe under a slab, a sewer line under a 100-year-old oak tree, a water heater installed the same year as the roof, both quietly counting down to the same expensive year. The house that looks perfect can be sitting on top of a disaster, and the house with the ugly carpet can have flawless bones. You are not buying a house. You are buying a plumbing system, an electrical system, and a foundation, with a house wrapped around them for decoration. So let's get into it. What do you actually check? The first thing, and I call this asking for the pipe's birth certificate, is finding out what your supply lines are made of and roughly how old they are. Go to the basement, the crawl space, or wherever the pipes are exposed, and just look. Copper is copper-colored, obviously, and it lasts 50 years or more if it was installed right. PEX is usually red, blue, or white flexible plastic, common since the late 90s, and it is actually a fine, modern material. The one you are hunting for is dull gray plastic pipe with a printed line on it because that is polybutylene, installed mostly between 1978 and 1995, and it fails from the inside without warning. If you see galvanized steel, which looks like dull silver pipe with threaded joints, understand that it rusts closed from the inside over 60 to 80 years and eventually chokes your water pressure to nothing even before it leaks. The trick here, the one thing to remember, you are not trying to identify every pipe in the house. You are trying to find the oldest, worst section, because that is the one that fails first. Second thing, turn on 3 faucets at once, upstairs and downstairs, and flush a toilet while you are at it. This is the test almost nobody does. Standing at one sink with the water running tells you almost nothing. Running several fixtures at the same time tells you whether the supply lines are wide enough and clean enough inside to actually deliver water under real household conditions, the way it happens every single morning when 3 people are getting ready at once. If the pressure drops hard the moment you open a second tap, you are looking at either undersized old piping or mineral buildup narrowing the inside of the pipes, and either one means a repiping bill in your future. Third, find the main shutoff valve and physically try to turn it. Most buyers never do this. A shutoff valve that is painted over, rusted solid, or hidden behind drywall that was added after the fact is not a small detail. It means that in an actual emergency, a burst pipe at 2 in the morning, nobody in that house is turning off the water fast, and every minute counts double when water is running. Fourth, check the water heater's birthday. Every tank has a serial number sticker, and the first 4 digits usually tell you the manufacture date. A tank water heater has an honest lifespan of 8 to 12 years. Past that, you are on borrowed time, and when they fail, they do not always fail gently. Look for rust streaks running down from the top seams and check whether there is a drain for the drip pan underneath, because a drip pan with nowhere for the water to go is decoration, not protection. Fifth, and this is the one that saves the most money when people actually do it. Get the sewer line scoped before you sign anything, especially on any home built before the 1980s or with mature trees near the yard. A sewer camera inspection runs somewhere around $200 to $400, and it will show you exactly what is happening inside that line. Roots, cracks, bellies, where the pipe has sagged and started collecting waste instead of draining it. Ask the company to record the footage and walk you through it afterward, because a good technician will show you the exact footage where the roots enter. And that single clip tells you more than any written report ever will. Compare that few $100s against a sewer line replacement, which routinely runs into 5 figures once you are digging up a yard or a driveway, sometimes with the city involved if the line runs under the street. That is the cheapest insurance policy in this entire checklist, and it is the one step buyers skip most often because it feels optional right up until the day it isn't. Sixth, get down and look at the base of every toilet and under every sink for a faint ring of mineral staining, even a small one. Slow leaks announce themselves quietly for a long time before they announce themselves loudly. Press gently on the subfloor around those spots with your fingertips. If it gives even slightly, softer than the floor 6 inches away, water has been sitting there. Seventh, check for a pressure regulator and an expansion tank near the main water line, and if there is a gauge, read it. City water pressure should sit under 80 pounds per square inch. Higher than that for years at a time is quietly stressing every joint, every washer, every appliance connection in the house. The kind of damage that shows up as a dozen small leaks instead of one big story. Eighth, flush a toilet and listen. A hard bang or a shudder in the walls right after the water shuts off is called water hammer, and it usually means missing air chambers or pipes that were not strapped down properly. Not an emergency by itself, but a sign of shortcuts taken somewhere else too. Ninth, check the outdoor spigots separately and ask specifically whether they are frost-free and whether they have their own shutoff. An ordinary hose bib in a cold climate without a separate shutoff is one of the most common sources of a hidden slow leak inside an exterior wall. The kind that rots framing for 2 winters before anyone notices the wall feels soft. 10th, and this is the one I care about most because it is the one people skip out of politeness. Ask directly who did the last plumbing renovation and ask to see the permit. Unpermitted work is the single biggest hidden liability in an older home because it means nobody with any accountability signed off on it, and it was very likely done to save money rather than to do it right. A good sign is a seller who can pull up the permit number without missing a beat. A bad sign is a seller who suddenly gets vague, changes the subject, or tells you the contractor was a guy a friend recommended. If the seller cannot answer clearly, that is your answer, and you should treat that section of the house as unknown until you get your own eyes on it. Now zoom out with me for a second, because the checklist is not really the point. The point is what all 10 of these things have in common. Every one of them is invisible from the kitchen island. Every one of them is the kind of thing that shows up on an inspection report as a small line item, if it shows up at all, and turns into the biggest expense of the first 3 years you own the house. I have watched families spend 18 months saving for a down payment, obsessing over school districts and countertop material, and then skip the $200 sewer scope because the deal already felt exhausting and they just wanted it done. I understand the feeling. Buying a house is one of the most emotionally draining things a person does, and by the time you're finally under contract, the last thing you want is one more inspection, one more delay, one more bill. But the house does not care how tired you are of looking at houses. It is going to do what old pipe does on its own schedule, whether you ask the right questions or not, and it will not wait politely for a better time. My father used to say something to me in Japanese that does not translate perfectly, but the closest I can get it in English is this. The house speaks in a quiet voice, and it only speaks once before you sign. After that, it stops asking politely and starts sending you invoices instead. That line has sat with me for 30 years, and every time I forget it, a house reminds me why I shouldn't have. So here's what I want you to actually do. Tonight, if you are already living in a house, or before your next showing, if you are still looking, find your water heater and read the serial number and do the math on how old it really is. Find your main shutoff and turn it, just to know it moves. Walk your own basement or crawl space with a flashlight and look for that dull gray pipe, because knowing what you're already living with is worth as much as knowing what you're about to buy. If you are under contract on a house right now, call a sewer scope company tomorrow morning before you do anything else on your list. It is the cheapest $200 you will ever spend on a house. Tell me in the comments what year your house was built, and whether you have found any surprises in your own pipes, because I read every one of them. And some of the worst stories I have ever heard came from people typing them out in a comment section at midnight. A cracked cast iron line, a water heater nobody had touched in 19 years, a shutoff valve that hadn't turned since the Clinton administration, a sewer scope that found a child's toy truck lodged 40 feet down a line that hadn't drained properly in a decade. I want to hear yours too, and if you're still shopping, do not let a real estate agent's schedule rush you past any of these 10. A good house will still be a good house after a sewer scope. A bad one will show you exactly what it is, on your terms, while you can still walk away. Next time I want to show you how to read an electrical panel the same way we just read a plumbing system, because there are 3 signs of trouble that hide inside a panel that looks perfectly clean from the outside, and one of them is hiding behind a single loose screw that most inspectors never bother to remove. It took me 20 years to learn what to look for behind that screw, and I promise you, once you know it, you will never look at a breaker box the same way again.